story is based on true events. The following events are real and deeply disturbing. This story is based on true and documented accounts. If you choose to continue, prepare yourself to confront a terrifying and inescapable truth that few have the courage to face. What you are about to see is not for the faint of heart. The images and sounds that follow may send chills down your spine, make your skin crawl, and leave you with a lingering sense of unease. This is your last chance to turn back. If you decide to proceed, be aware that fear is real, and it is lurking. If you have enough courage, continue, and welcome to your worst nightmare. I still remember the cold, oppressive silence that greeted me as I approached the farm. The trees surrounding the property seemed to lean inwards, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to stretch and writhe in the dim light of dawn. The old farmhouse, known as Hinterkaifeck, stood alone in the desolate countryside of Germany, a relic of a bygone era. The year was 1922, and the Hinterkaifeck farm was home to the Gruber family. Andreas, his wife Casilia, their daughter Victoria, her two children, Casilia's brother Joseph, and a maid named Maria Baumgartner. The farm was isolated, miles from the nearest town, and had always had an unsettling reputation. It was said that Andreas had reported strange occurrences in the days leading up to the murders, footsteps in the snow leading to the house but never away, and mysterious noises at night. One chilly March evening, the Gruber family was preparing for bed. The day had been ordinary, but there was an air of unease that seemed to hang over the house. The wind howled outside, and the trees rustled ominously. As night fell, the farm was enveloped in darkness, broken only by the flickering light of a few lamps inside. That night, an intruder slipped through the shadows. It's believed the killer had been hiding in the barn or nearby woods, waiting for the right moment to strike. The first sign of the horror to come was when the family's livestock was brutally slaughtered. The killer's initial act of violence was masked by the noise of the animals, providing cover for what was about to happen inside the house. The family was asleep when the intruder made his way into the house. The crime was particularly brutal and methodical. The killer began with Andreas Gruber, who was struck in his bed. The axe used in the murder had belonged to the family, a grim irony that would come to symbolize the horror of the night. Andreas was struck multiple times, each blow precise and deadly. Casilia, his wife, was next. Her screams woke Victoria, but by then it was too late. Victoria, her children, and Joseph were all caught in the killer's ruthless path. The murders continued with brutal efficiency. The killer spared no one. Casilia's children, the innocent young ones, were also slain. Victoria's cries and the frantic sounds of the struggle filled the night air, but no one was there to hear them or come to their aid. The brutality didn't end with the murders. The killer remained in the house for some time after the murders were committed. The family's bodies were left in their beds, blood-soaked and lifeless. The killer meticulously cleaned up some of the blood and moved the bodies around the house, placing them in a grotesque arrangement. This act of post-mortem manipulation was perhaps the most chilling aspect of the crime, reflecting a cold, detached cruelty. The following morning, neighbors noticed something was wrong when the family didn't come to town as usual. They found the scene of horror, a tableau of death that seemed almost too horrifying to be real. The Gruber family and their maid lay in their beds, their lives brutally ended. The house was a mess of blood and chaos, and the sight was so shocking it left the entire community in a state of disbelief. The investigation that followed was thorough but ultimately fruitless. There were no clear suspects, and no motive could be determined. The authorities were baffled. How could such a brutal crime have been committed with no obvious leads or suspects? The killer had left no significant evidence behind and had vanished without a trace. As the investigation into the Hinterkaifeck murders continued, the horror of the crime began to seep into the very fabric of the community. Rumors swirled around the town, each more sinister than the last. Some believed the killer was a deranged local. Others speculated that the crime was committed by someone with an intimate knowledge of the family and the farm. Despite the extensive investigation, the authorities were unable to make any headway. The killer's identity remained a mystery, and the case grew cold. The Gruber farmhouse, once a place of daily life, became a symbol of fear and dread. The property was left abandoned, and the eerie silence that enveloped it seemed to deepen with each passing year. The hauntings began almost immediately. Those who dared to enter the farmhouse reported strange occurrences. Unexplained noises, like footsteps and whispers, echoed through the empty rooms. Visitors spoke of a chilling presence that seemed to linger, a malevolent force that pervaded the air. It was as if the horror of that night had seeped into the very walls of the house, forever tainting it. One particularly disturbing account came from a group of paranormal investigators who visited the farm years later. They set up their equipment and began their investigation in the dead of night. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and the house seemed to resist their presence. The investigators reported feeling an oppressive weight in the air and hearing disembodied voices that seemed to taunt and threaten. Their equipment captured unexplained phenomena, shadowy figures moving in the corners of their cameras, cold spots that seemed to materialize out of nowhere, and eerie sounds that defied explanation. The most chilling discovery was a series of photographs taken in the basement, which showed a ghostly figure standing in the shadows. The figure seemed to be watching, waiting, a spectral reminder of the murders that had taken place. The local legend grew with each passing year. The Hinterkaifeck farm became a place of pilgrimage for those fascinated by the macabre. Stories circulated about the ghostly apparitions of the Gruber family and their maid, roaming the property in search of peace or perhaps revenge. The house stood as a grim monument to the brutality of the crime and the mystery that had never been solved. Despite numerous theories and suspects over the years, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain one of Germany's most chilling unsolved cases. The killer's identity, motive, and whereabouts remain unknown. The farm, with its dark history and eerie reputation, stands as a testament to the unspeakable horror that once occurred within its walls. To this day, the Hinterkaifeck murders continue to haunt the imagination of those who hear about them. The unanswered questions and the lingering sense of dread ensure that the story of the Gruber family will never be forgotten. The chilling reminder of that fateful night lingers, a dark shadow over the countryside that refuses to fade. The following events are real and deeply disturbing. This story is based on true and documented accounts. If you choose to continue, prepare yourself to confront a terrifying and inescapable truth that few have the courage to face. What you are about to see is not for the faint of heart. The images and sounds that follow may send chills down your spine, make your skin crawl, and leave you with a lingering sense of unease. This is your last chance to turn back. If you decide to proceed, be aware that fear is real, and it is lurking. If you have enough courage, continue. And welcome to your worst nightmare. The air was thick with tension as I arrived at the small, nondescript house in the quiet town of Alling, Iowa. It was 1928, and I was about to delve into one of the most disturbing cases of demonic possession and exorcism that history has recorded. The house belonged to the Eklund family, and within its walls, a chilling horror W. Anna Eklund, a 27-year-old woman, had been exhibiting bizarre and frightening behavior for some time. Her symptoms began with inexplicable changes in her demeanor, sudden outbursts of rage, speaking in unknown languages, and an aversion to religious objects. The family was deeply concerned and turned to local priests for help. The situation quickly escalated beyond what they could handle. The exorcism that was to be performed was not just any ordinary rite. It involved two priests, Father Theophilus Reisinger and Father Arthur, who were renowned for their experience with exorcisms. They arrived at the Eklund home with a sense of foreboding, knowing they were facing something profoundly The first night of the exorcism was horrifying. Anna's behavior was erratic and violent. She would contort her body into unnatural positions and speak in guttural voices that seemed to come from somewhere deep within her. The priests could feel a palpable malevolence in the room, as if an ancient, dark force was fighting to maintain control over Anna. The exorcism began with traditional prayers and rituals, but the demonic presence resisted fiercely. Anna's voice would change, becoming harsh and mocking as it spoke through her. The entity seemed to have a sinister intelligence, taunting the priests and expressing a deep hatred for their attempts to expel it. The night was filled with strange phenomena. Objects in the room would move on their own, and the temperature would drop suddenly, creating an icy chill. The walls of the room seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. The priests, despite their training, were visibly shaken by the intensity of the possession. Anna's condition appeared to worsen, her physical appearance becoming gaunt and her eyes taking on a hollow, unsettling quality. One particularly disturbing moment occurred when Anna began to exhibit superhuman strength. Despite her frail appearance, she managed to overpower the priests, throwing them across the room with ease. It was clear that whatever was possessing her was not bound by normal human limitations. The first part of the exorcism was a brutal test of will and faith. The priests worked through the night, their voices growing hoarse from the constant recitation of prayers and commands. The room was a battlefield between the forces of good and evil, and the struggle was far from over. As dawn approached, the priests were exhausted but determined. They continued their ritual, hoping that the light of day would bring new strength and clarity. But the darkness within Anna seemed to be far from vanquished. The exorcism had only begun, and the true depth of the malevolent force they were dealing with was still to be fully revealed. The second phase of the exorcism was marked by an escalation of both physical and supernatural manifestations. As the priests continued their work, the malevolent entity within Anna Eklund became increasingly defiant and aggressive. The sheer scale of the possession was beyond what they had anticipated, and the horrors that unfolded were a testament to the profound darkness they were confronting. The room where the exorcism took place was filled with an oppressive atmosphere. The walls seemed to close in, and the air was thick with a sense of foreboding. Anna's behavior became even more disturbing. She would laugh maniacally, her face contorted into grotesque expressions. The entity within her would speak with a voice that sounded almost like multiple voices layered over one another, creating a cacophony of terror. One of the most harrowing incidents occurred when Anna began to exhibit knowledge of events and people she could not possibly have known. She spoke of hidden sins and secrets from the priests' pasts, revealing intimate details that were impossible to explain. This seemed to bolster the entity's claim of being a powerful and ancient force with access to forbidden knowledge. The physical manifestations of the possession grew more extreme. Anna's body would levitate off the ground, hovering in mid-air as though held by an invisible force. The priests witnessed objects flying across the room, seemingly guided by a malevolent will. The house itself seemed to be a conduit for the dark energies, with strange symbols appearing on the walls and floors, symbols that had no clear origin. Despite their exhaustion and the overwhelming nature of the possession, the priests continued their efforts with unwavering resolve. They employed every tool at their disposal: holy water, blessed artifacts, and the full liturgy of the exorcism ritual. Each ritual seemed to provoke a fierce reaction from the entity, which would lash out in anger and resistance. On the third night, the battle reached a fever pitch. Anna's screams echoed through the house, a mix of human and otherworldly cries that would chill even the bravest soul. The priests faced the entity's fury head-on, their voices rising in a desperate plea for divine intervention. The air was thick with the acrid smell of sulfur, and the room seemed to tremble with the force of the conflict. The turning point came during a climactic confrontation. As the priests recited a particularly powerful prayer, Anna's body convulsed violently. The entity's hold over her seemed to weaken momentarily, and the room was filled with a blinding light. For a brief moment, it appeared that the entity was retreating, its power diminishing under the force of the prayer. But the respite was short-lived. The entity roared back with renewed strength, its anger manifesting in a final, desperate assault. The priests were pushed to their limits, their voices strained and their bodies worn. Yet, with one last surge of faith and determination, they pressed on, invoking every ounce of spiritual power they could muster. In the early hours of the morning, as the first light of dawn began to creep into the room, there was a sudden stillness. The air felt lighter, and the oppressive weight seemed to lift. Anna's body relaxed, and her breathing returned to a normal rhythm. The priests, though exhausted and shaken, felt a profound sense of relief. The exorcism had ended, but the ordeal left deep scars on everyone involved. Anna Eklund's life was forever altered by the experience, and the priests carried the weight of the haunting encounter with them. The house in Alling, Iowa, remained a place of dark history, a reminder of the night when the forces of good and evil clashed in a battle for a soul. The story of Anna Eklund and the exorcism that took place is a chilling reminder of the profound depths of darkness that can lie hidden within the human soul. For those who hear it, the tale serves as a haunting testament to the power of malevolent forces and the relentless struggle to overcome them. The following events are real and deeply disturbing. This story is based on true and documented accounts. If you choose to continue, prepare yourself to confront a terrifying and inescapable truth that few have the courage to face. What you are about to see is not for the faint of heart. The images and sounds that follow may send chills down your spine, make your skin crawl, and leave you with a lingering sense of unease. This is your last chance to turn back. If you decide to proceed, be aware that fear is real, and it is lurking. If you have enough courage, continue, and welcome to your worst nightmare. I had always been a skeptic when it came to the supernatural, but what happened to the Smurl family in West Pittston, Pennsylvania, in the late 1970s changed my perspective forever. The Smurl haunting is a tale so terrifying and complex that it feels like it belongs in the pages of a horror novel. But as I recount these events, I assure you that this is the grim reality the Smurl family faced. It all began when Jack and Janet Smurl, along with their 2 daughters, moved into a modest but well-kept home on Chase Street. At first, everything seemed perfect. The house was spacious and the neighborhood friendly. However, it wasn't long before unsettling occurrences began to unsettle the family. The first signs were subtle. Janet reported hearing strange noises at night, whispers, scratching sounds, and what seemed to be footsteps pacing up and down the hallway. Jack dismissed these as the creaks and groans of an old house, but Janet's growing anxiety couldn't be easily explained away. Soon, the disturbances became more pronounced. One evening, as the family sat down for dinner, the lights flickered violently before plunging them into darkness. The Smurls assumed it was a temporary electrical issue, but when the power returned, they found that the furniture had been rearranged in an almost ritualistic pattern. Objects in the house began to move on their own, and strange, foul odors, like rotting meat, permeated the rooms, seemingly without a source. The situation escalated quickly. Janet started experiencing disturbing phenomena in her sleep. She would awaken to find herself paralyzed, unable to move or scream, while shadowy figures loomed over her bed. The feeling of being watched became constant. The family's once peaceful nights were now plagued by nightmares and inexplicable fears. Desperate, the Smurls reached out to local clergy for help. Father Martin, a seasoned priest with experience in dealing with paranormal cases, agreed to investigate. What he witnessed during his visits was profoundly disturbing. Objects in the house seemed to defy the laws of physics, levitating and moving with a malevolent purpose. The atmosphere in the house was thick with an oppressive energy, making even the most stalwart individuals feel an overwhelming sense of dread. One night, Father Martin conducted a blessing of the house. As he recited prayers and sprinkled holy water, the disturbance intensified. The temperature in the room plummeted, and an eerie wind howled through the corridors. The walls seemed to close in, and the Smurls could hear a deep, guttural voice echoing through the house, mocking the priest's efforts and threatening the family with vile, incomprehensible curses. Despite Father Martin's best efforts, the haunting continued unabated. The Smurls sought help from Ed and Lorraine Warren, renowned paranormal investigators who had dealt with numerous high-profile cases. The Warrens arrived, bringing with them their extensive experience and equipment. They set up cameras and recording devices throughout the house to capture evidence of the paranormal activity. What they recorded was chilling. The footage showed objects moving on their own, strange lights appearing in the rooms, and a chilling presence that seemed to hover over the house. The audio recordings captured disembodied voices speaking in harsh, menacing tones. The Warrens confirmed that the Smurls were dealing with something extraordinarily malevolent, an entity that seemed to have a personal vendetta against the family. The Warrens also conducted an extensive investigation into the history of the house. They discovered that it was built on land that had a dark and troubled past. Previous owners had reported similar disturbances, and there were rumors of occult activities taking place in the area. It seemed that the house itself might have been a focal point for dark forces, which had now manifested in a terrifying way. The Smurls' lives were becoming increasingly unbearable. The entity's attacks grew more violent, with physical manifestations of its rage. The family experienced terrifying visions, including apparitions of grotesque figures and scenes of torment. One particularly horrifying episode involved a full-blown possession attempt on Janet. During a family gathering, she suddenly convulsed and spoke in languages she had never known, her voice taking on a deep, resonant tone that seemed to come from a place of pure malevolence. The tension in the Smurl household reached a breaking point. The entity seemed to feed off the family's fear and turmoil, growing stronger with each passing day. It was clear that the haunting was far from over, and the Smurls faced an ongoing battle with a dark force that refused to let them go. As the weeks turned into months, the Smurls found themselves trapped in a relentless nightmare. Despite the Warrens' efforts and various exorcism attempts, the haunting showed no signs of abating. The entity's power seemed to grow stronger, and its attacks more frequent and severe. The Smurls' daily lives became a struggle for survival. They could no longer enjoy the comforts of their home. Every corner of the house seemed to harbor an unseen menace. The family members began to suffer from severe psychological and physical distress. Janet's sleep paralysis episodes worsened, and she experienced disturbing hallucinations that made it difficult for her to distinguish between reality and the supernatural. Jack, too, found himself haunted by persistent fears and anxiety, struggling to keep his family together amidst the chaos. The Warrens decided that a more aggressive approach was needed. They performed a series of exorcisms, each one pushing the entity to its limits. The rituals were intense and draining, involving not only prayers and holy water, but also the use of blessed relics and powerful symbols. During these exorcisms, the house was filled with unearthly noises and violent manifestations. The entity would thrash about, creating a cacophony of sound and a tempest of unseen forces that made the very walls seem to vibrate with rage. One particularly harrowing exorcism took place in the dead of night. As the Warrens and a team of priests conducted the rite, the house erupted in a frenzy of supernatural activity. The temperature dropped so dramatically that the air became painfully cold. Objects were flung across the rooms with a force that defied explanation, and the once subtle whispers grew into thunderous roars. The family watched in horror as Janet was lifted off the ground, her body contorted in unnatural ways, while the entity screamed obscenities and threats. During this exorcism, the team captured some of the most disturbing evidence of the haunting. The video footage showed dark, shadowy figures moving swiftly through the rooms, and the audio recordings revealed a deep, growling voice that seemed to come from the very bowels of hell. The entity's presence was overpowering, and even the most experienced investigators were left shaken by the intensity of the activity. Despite the relentless efforts, the entity's hold on the Smurl family remained unshaken. The final exorcism was a desperate measure, and the team was pushed to their limits. It involved a series of rituals designed to completely eradicate the malevolent presence. The Warrens, along with a group of priests, performed the rite with a sense of urgency and determination, hoping to drive the entity out once and for all. The climax of the exorcism was both terrifying and surreal. As the rituals reached their peak, the entity's rage manifested in a final, all-out assault on the house. The walls trembled, and a storm of supernatural activity engulfed the rooms. The family could feel the oppressive weight of the entity as it fought back with its remaining strength. It was a battle of wills, and the outcome was uncertain. In the end, the exorcism appeared to have succeeded. The activity in the house gradually subsided, and the Smurls experienced a period of relative peace. The entity, though weakened, had been driven out, and the house was no longer the scene of constant terror. The Smurls could finally begin to rebuild their lives, though the scars of their ordeal remained. The Smurl haunting remains one of the most complex and chilling cases of supernatural activity ever recorded. The events that took place in that seemingly ordinary house revealed a dark and powerful force that defied explanation. For those who hear the story, it serves as a stark reminder of the potential for evil that can lurk just beneath the surface of our everyday lives. The Smurl family's ordeal was a harrowing journey into the depths of darkness, a battle against a malevolent entity that tested their courage and faith to the limit.